Hello everybody, CVH here, back with another Elder Scrolls Legends video, this time talking about the deck I used in this weekend's in-game event, the Noble Gauntlet. I know it's been a while since I've uploaded a video on this channel for Legends, but I thought there'd be no better time to get back into things. I spent a lot of this fine Saturday playing the Noble Gauntlet, and my runs went extremely well, I have to say. 7-0, 7-2, and 7-0 put me at 21-2 for currently second place overall. I'm sure that'll drop somewhat. Again, there is still time to play this mode. It goes all throughout the weekend, so a day and a half left or something like that. So if you're looking for a fun deck to play, this could be the deck for you. Just thought I'd talk about my card choices and why I played the deck I played. A lot of the reason I'm recording this too is because I didn't play a single mirror match the entire time. All three runs, never played against another Tribunal deck, which was interesting. Definitely no Tribunal decks, no control decks really, and this is definitely a Tribunal control built for the Noble Gauntlet. If you guys don't know what the Noble Gauntlet is, it does say in the game, but the Noble Gauntlet requires you to build a deck made entirely of commons and rares. So that is the stipulation here, and a lot of the reason that I wasn't seeing much Tribunal or much control. So first, before I get into the specific card choices, I'll just talk about why I chose to play Tribunal control in the first place, because I've seen a lot of people talk about this format and this Gauntlet mode, and say that aggro is pretty much the way to go. Aggro and mid-range, control's not really that good, and I have to say that seems to be like the general consensus, because all throughout my runs, like I mentioned, no other Tribunal decks. Just a little on the control side, I think like one or two scouts kind of tilted that way. There was a lot of aggro, a lot of mid-range. A couple sorcerers were a little bit slower on the mid-range. Out of my 23 games total, 18 of them included strength. So at least 18 decks including red. I mean, that definitely gives you a hint that it's going to be pretty aggressive. Tons of Crusader, tons of Veteran, tons of Warrior. Those kind of classes were in abundance, but no Tribunal to speak of at all. I think I played against maybe one Spell Sword and it was aggressive, no mages. So this was really, kind of a rarity. And I think there are three cards that really stick out to me as why I thought this control deck would actually be good, a lot better than people thought it would be at least. Three cards from Houses of Morrowind, the recent expansion, because the last Noble Gauntlet I think was before Morrowind, but the three cards that I'm talking about are Rising of Bones, Bloodline Outcast, and Spirit Knife. So Rising of Bones first, in conjunction with another one of the key cards in this deck, which is Chanter of Akatosh. After you play an action, it summons a random creature from your deck with the same cost. So with Rising of Bones, you can essentially summon two 4-cost creatures in addition to the 2 3/3 Risen Dead with Guard that Rising of Bones has given you. And that is a combo that's actually found its way into a lot of constructed Tribunal decks as well. If you're watching recent tournaments, I've seen a lot of Tribunal decks focused around Chanter of Akatosh. Very similar to this, except with a lot better cards because they can play epics and legendaries, but that is still a critical combo in those decks. And since Chanter's a rare and Rising of Bones is a common, I felt like it would be extremely powerful to just stabilize and give us a huge board in the Noble Gauntlet. And for our 4-drops, we are playing Elusive Schemer, Hive Defenders. These are pretty much staple. Don't have access to an additional 4-cost in Emperor's Blade, so I was trying the Moonmoth Castellan, which performed very nicely. And of course, if you're using that combo in the late game, you'll get the plot effect, and that can actually cheat in. It is RNG dependent, of course, but it can actually cheat some higher rarity cards into your hand in a format where no one's really prepared for them. You can get Dagoth Ur, Indral, Archmage, Vigilant Giant. I actually got that one twice, and it was so sick both times. But on to the other two cards are really the reason I wanted to play Tribunal. And think that control is a lot better than people thought it might be. Bloodline Outcast did so much heavy lifting throughout this entire series of Gauntlet runs. Besides the Barrow Stalkers, it's our only drain in the deck, our only life gain. I considered some other life gain, but in this format it seemed like removal was, just more rare, considering that you can't play cards like Dawn's Wrath, you can't play Belligerent Giant, aggro decks can't silence this with Earthbone Spinner, they could play like Bone Bow, but there's a lot of really inefficient ways to deal with the 7/7. It's huge, it acts as a threat, and it drains you for a ton as soon as it's able to hit for exactly once. And of course, we're playing a control deck with a massive amount of removal. That's one of the reasons I really wanted to play this deck, is just because it has so much efficient early game to fight for the board and so much great removal, and I did anticipate a good amount of aggro. I don't think I anticipated quite as much aggro as I saw, but that is one reason I decided to play it. And speaking of removal, Spirit Knife, the third card that made me think that control was actually going to be good. Just another option to get rid of anything big. Cards like Bloodline Outcast, or just, big dumb vanillas in general, are really good in formats like this, and Spirit Knife is a perfect counter to the Outcast. It's a perfect counter to Clockwork Scorpion, which is really popular, obviously, in any green deck in the format. So besides that, let's go through some of the card choices in general. So Cruel Fire Bloom, that's a weird one. For the first Gauntlet run, this is the only change I made throughout the 3. For the first Gauntlet run, I was playing a Mummify, and then I switched it to Fire Bloom for the second and the third Gauntlets, and I did that just because I felt like I already had enough single target removal. There aren't as many good Mummify targets. People aren't really playing, like Hand of Dagoth is obviously an epic. Things like that aren't really a problem, and I did have a lot of like Cast into Time, Piercing Javelin, Spirit Knife were pretty much doing the lifting there, and Cruel Fire Bloom's kind of nice with Chanter of Akatosh, in addition to being able to help you remove things cheap early. Very Magicka efficient, costing 0 obviously, but with Chanter, you can actually search for those 0-cost schemers after you put them into your deck. So I thought that was kind of a cool interaction that I've seen once or twice before. Just a one of, we have some pretty decent targets like maybe Indral Mastermind or the Scholar after it's already given us the Frost Atronach. Early removal, Staples, Execute, and Firebolt. Obviously really good. The Velothi Assassin really helps us fight for the board early. It was, a little bit underwhelming actually compared to like Barrowstalker and Wardcrafter, but I anticipated so much aggro that I just wanted to have that many 2-drops that I could immediately start playing and fighting with. Harpy, Great Prophecy, good 2-drop in a pinch, stops some snowball cards like Goblin Skulk. Nothing really to speak of in the first 2 turns. Dark Guardian and Indral Mastermind, these are both pretty much staples in the Tribunal decks and constructed as well. Super good against aggro, and Indral Mastermind just amazing to filter through your deck, find the right cards. Late in the game, we are playing a lot of early game to stave off the aggro decks, so it's pretty critical that we find those heavy hitters like the Conjuration Scholar and Bloodline Outcast, find our Chanter of Akatosh, or good actions to pair with them. Just a really powerful card that every control deck using Endurance should be playing, in my opinion, and that goes for Constructed as well. Reverberating Strike, this card was just really efficient as it is in Constructed. Best moment with this card was killing 3 Circle Initiates on, I think, turn 4 after my opponent had played 1 and then 2 of them on the 2 previous turns. Then my opponent conceded, so that was pretty nice. Crushing Blow is okay too. I mean, if you wanted to double up, I recommend playing Strike first because you don't really care about the burn, and like I said just now, the all enemy creatures with the same name effect can be relevant. More relevant than the burn at least. Mage's Trick could be good if you want to double up as well, but I felt pretty comfortable here. Soul Tear, I think it's really important to make sure you have ways to get back cards like Chanter of Akatosh, get back cards like Bloodline Outcast, because there are limited amounts of threats in this format, a limited amount of late game for sure, which is a lot of the reason people are not too okay with control in the format, but I really think Soul Tear helps a lot, so you should be playing it, and of course you're getting those buffs, which is even more relevant in a format like this, because no one's really prepared for a 9/9 or 12/12 Bloodline Outcast. It just gets pretty absurd. I also reused Moonmoth Castellan a couple times just because those extra guards turned out to be like huge when you're just fighting for that incremental bit of value as well. Elusive Schemer, great card draw, should be playing it. Pretty self-explanatory. Firestorm is my budget, literally budget Ice Storm replacement. It was pretty good, I have to say. I don't think I was anticipating it being as good as it was, which was like above average, just because there was a ton of aggro. Like, I really can't overstate that. But whenever Firestorm killed, because I was thinking in my head, I was like, maybe I'll swap out Firestorm's next run, and then it would have a game where it would kill like 2 or 3 or even 4 things in a lane and just completely save me off of Prophecy. And I was like, okay, we probably need this in this meta right now. Didn't want to play the full 3 of. The third one was the Mummify and then the Fire Bloom, and it could even be something else if, I mean, this in-game event's probably not going to be around long enough for a true meta to develop, but you could swap the Firestorms out technically, but probably right to play them if you're seeing this video and you want to play this weekend. Hive Defender, it's a control deck that uses willpower. Lightning Bolt, it's a deck that uses intelligence. Moonmoth Castellan, like I said, sort of an iffy pick, but I liked having the extra the extra Chanter of Akatosh targets off of Rising of Bones, and this card did actually a lot of work. I really didn't like to play it on turn 4, obviously. It's about comparable to playing a Rising of Bones raw on turn 4 without even being able to betray. Mostly you want to play it at least on turn 5 following an Executor Firebolt, maybe turn 6 after one of your numerous 2-drops. Late in the game it's just great, gets you ahead of your opponent and could get something huge. Even in games where you get something really weak like a Mournhold Guardian or a Gearwork Spider, both of which I got by the way, even in those games it can help you out somewhat and just give the little bit of value that you need, or maybe another betrayed target for Rising of Bones, and of course if you get a card like Vigilant Giant or Dagoth, it might just win you the game, especially in a format like the Noble Gauntlet is in. Rising of Bones, I already talked about the combo potential with Chanter, but it is just a really good defensive tool in general. This deck has tons and tons of guards. You can go Barrow Stalker into Dark Guardian, into Hive Defender, into Phalanx Exemplar, into Scholar. That's like a guard curve from turns 2 to 6, and Rising of Bones can add 2 guards to the board at pretty much any time when you're just trying to stabilize against aggro. You could use cards like Conjuration Scholar, which are really weak, just as that betray target, and a lot of the times this card did save me against aggro decks, even when I wasn't using it to completely fill my board in a crazy way with Chanter of Akatosh. You sometimes just need 2/3/3 guards. Cast in a time, it was fantastic, great removal, and immediately getting rid of all your opponent's Clockwork Scorpions or Bloodline Outcasts or like White Run Protectors, whatever you can assess is the largest creature in your opponent's deck, is just pretty backbreaking in a format where you don't have too many threats. Chanter, it was great combo potential. It's allowed to stick more often than you'd think it would be against all these aggro decks that don't really have access to Firebolts and things like that, but obviously you want to try to play this in a turn where you can capitalize with one of your ideally Rising of Bones, but if you can play it in the same turn as a Piercing Javelin or a Cast into Time or a Lightning Bolt, that's often good enough. Moving on, Javelin, pretty obvious. Phalanx Exemplar, just a really huge guard, so we're definitely playing that. Conjuration Scholar, it's kind of similar to Phalanx Exemplar in stats, just a little bit more expensive. It wasn't fantastic, but I do think it's probably the best thing to play on 6 just because you want to have more things with stats. I was considering Fate Weaver, which probably would be fine too, but I really liked having the Conjuration Scholar 1/2 body left behind because it gave me a good sacrifice target for cards like Rising of Bones and Firebloom. And in addition to the guard, it wasn't just one guard like Phalanx Exemplar. You don't really want to sacrifice this for a betray. Bloodline Outcast and Spirit Knife I already hyped up. They were both really good, 2 MVPs of the deck. I don't think I would want to play Tribunal in the Noble format without these cards. I guess I didn't talk about Temple Patriarch. You might be wondering, if you have a keen eye and you're watching this video, why on earth am I running Temple Patriarch? Well, the way the game works is that you have to play one of the 3 attribute cards, such as Temple Patriarch, Power of the Almsevi, or Archcanon Sarioni, if you want to actually play a Tribunal deck. And since the other 2 cards simply are too rare, I think that is one of the reasons that I think people are not gravitating towards Tribunal. And maybe I didn't see it, because in order to do so, you literally have to play at least a copy of Temple Patriarch, and I don't really think building around Exalts is that good. I couldn't really justify it even in this format, so I guess no one else could either. So yeah, this card is literally just a 7-cost 5/5 in this deck, which sounds pretty bad. It's not as bad as it sounds, but it is pretty bad. It's obviously just strictly worse than Bloodline Outcast in every way. Yeah, it's not too much I can say about this. There are times when you can get it for free from your deck with Chanter of Akatosh and Spirit Knife, but then you'd rather just get Bloodline Outcast. We're literally just playing this card because we have to. And the best it ever is when you're milling it with a Indoril Mastermind, or you're just adding threats to the board after you've already stabilized, and at that point it really doesn't matter what your cards do because you're going to attack for lethal anyway. But yeah, not great, but a necessary evil, so I just said screw it, we'll play 74 good cards in a Temple Patriarch so I can play the Tribunal deck that I want to play. And Shocking Wamasu to round things out. It's decent stats and a really good effect, obviously, just kind of 2-for-1s a lot of the time. It's good to help you stabilize. I like it a lot. It wasn't the main heavy hitter in the late game, obviously, because cards like Scholar, and especially the Outcast, and whatever we sold there back, have more stats, but it's a solid card when you just need to hit more single target removal to your opponent's threats. This deck does have a ton of removal, executes, Firebolts, Reverberating Strikes, it has Lightning Bolts, Javelins, Cast into Time, Spirit Knife, and the Wamasu just adds to that. So this deck really doesn't have any problem removing things. It does have kind of a problem with wide boards sometimes, so if your opponent's playing a bunch of small things, we don't have access to Ice Storm, and Firestorm only goes so far with answering those. One of the decks I did lose to, my 2 losses were to Token Crusader, is like an aggro Token Crusader hybrid, and also Michaela was playing an Archer deck that focused on cycling through her entire deck and playing Factotum, so like Shrine of Namiras and a bunch of draw. She didn't have access to Assemble Titan, obviously, which is like the best Factotum, but they were good enough in the format. I don't feel like that would be too bad of a matchup. You could include Vicious Dreg if you're worried about supports, and obviously if I had Cast into Time for like the really relevant Factotums, that would have been really good and probably put a stop to the game plan, but that could be potentially a bad matchup. And the Token Crusader, it was pretty similar to the decks that I was beating for the majority of the Gauntlet, but you know, eventually you can even take a loss here or there to some of your best matchups, and if I had Ice Storm, obviously it probably would have been a lot easier. So a lot of single target removal. You just want to mulligan for your 1s and 2s and 3s against an aggro deck so you can fight for the board early really effectively and not let the board get wide in the first place. But it was a really good deck, a fun deck. I think it's proof that the format for Noble Gauntlet isn't as straight aggro or mid-range as people might think it is. So if you're looking for a fun deck to play and you're more of a control fan, I definitely recommend it if you have time in the next day and a half or so when the Gauntlet's still around. If you're looking for fast games because you don't have a lot of time to play the Gauntlet and you want to complete 3 runs to get on the leaderboard, I don't recommend this deck because the games tend to take way longer than any of the decks that I was playing against. But hopefully you guys enjoyed listening to the reasoning behind some of these card choices. Best of luck in the Noble Gauntlet. I'll try to record some more videos on my channel for Legends sometime in the future. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.